A debate over Marsy's law has erupted among local police agencies. The law, which is meant to shield victims of crime from the public spotlight, is also being cited in Oshkosh as a reason to protect the identity of police officers in two recent shootings. In a First Alert update, Jason Zimmerman spoke to the district attorney today about this decision. He is live for us in Oshkosh. Jason.
Cami, the district attorney today says the decision is based on his interpretation of the law, which has played out inconsistently all across the state since being approved by voters, and preventing some police officers as well who use force from being identified. Over the past few months, Marsy's law has shown its presence in Winnebago County, not just as a constitutional amendment passed by voters in 2020 to protect victims' privacy rights, but also those of police officers using force.
When there's a request for information like this, where an officer is a victim, if we provide the information, it could be subject to a victim rights complaint, or if we don't provide it, then we could be subject to scrutiny for not providing records that people want to see.
It's happened twice so far in Oshkosh, most recently where police refused to release the name of an officer who shot and wounded a suicidal 34-year-old man who was armed with a hunting rifle. That was about 6 weeks ago. While the name of the man shot was released to the public, the officer's identity was not. Also back in March, an officer shot and wounded a person who drove at police in the area of the Oshkosh Farmers Market who they were trying to make contact with.
I know the police department had made their call independently that they were not releasing those names, at least at this time, and our decision was essentially consistent with our policy that victim information doesn't get put out there until whatever point it has to. If there was a trial, for example, then those names would come out. There's no alternative at that point.
Other jurisdictions have taken the opposite approach. In Allegheny County, the name of a Grand Chute police officer involved in a shooting last week was released 24 hours after the incident.
There has been an opinion put out there that it's a balancing test case by case, but that's kind of the extent of it so far. It's possible that there ends up being more guidance on this, and I think if there's not, then you're going to probably continue to see some inconsistent interpretations.
I also reached out to Police Chief Dean Smith, but was told he is out of the office today. I can also tell you this is a debate not just isolated to Wisconsin. Right now, it continues to play out all across the country in states which have approved Marsy's law. Reporting in Oshkosh, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.